Today, we're talking with Joel Fleishman, Chairman of the Urban Institute Board of Trustees and Professor of Law and Public Policy at Duke University.
Obviously, the most important thing from the nonprofit sector point of view was the market meltdown and what that was beginning to have, the effect that was beginning to have on nonprofit organizations of all kinds. You know, the most visible effect has been with respect to foundations and their assets, and those foundation assets declined on average about 28%. The consequence of that, of course, means that not in 2009, but in 2010 and probably 2011, the level of foundation giving will be down. Of course, with respect to nonprofit universities and other endowment holding institutions, it is already meaning that they are starved for funds. I can't remember a comparable period in my professional life in which nonprofit organizations suffered that much of a decline in their basic asset base. And for universities, it was really a tremendous blow. Now, of course, these institutions last for eternity, and they'll have time to recover. But in the short run, universities are doing things like providing early retirement packages. In some cases, cutting staff outright, which I never remembered institutions like Harvard to do. But it all, the extent to which they felt the pain really was a function of what percentage of their operating costs were being financed out of endowment draws, because it was in the endowment component that shrunk. So that's a really important thing. The other, that happened, another important thing was the Madoff scandal. I mean, which was shocking to everybody. It affected Jewish institutions very badly because Madoff exploited his connections, his relations in the Jewish community to attract money from Jewish individuals and also Jewish foundations and Jewish educational institutions. And so Yeshiva University in New York lost a great deal of money. Brandeis lost a great deal of money. Foundations that support Brandeis, like the Carl Shapiro Foundation, lost a great deal of money. There are some foundations that went completely out of business because of that. So it was a differential consequence. For me, the interesting fact about the Madoff scandal is what it revealed about the inadequate decision making by boards of trustees. Because if you look at the foundations that ended up putting 50% to 100% of their assets in Madoff were clearly, in my view, violating the prohibition against jeopardizing investments in the Internal Revenue Code. I've said in the original version of the book that the real problem of governance in nonprofits is that typically the boards of nonprofits the governance is really totally inadequate. There just simply is not the kind of attentiveness, there's simply not the kind of engagement, there's simply not the kind of scrutiny about decisions. The Madoff scandal really did highlight the extent to which governance in nonprofit organizations is not what it ought to be. That's a very important thing that happened, it seems to me, and I think it's created more of an environment towards looking at governance issues in nonprofit organizations than had been the case before. Historically, in this country, foundations were set up as perpetual institutions. That is, they go on forever. In the 90s, many of the large foundations being set up by high-tech people and others were set up not as perpetual foundations, but as spend-down, sunsetting foundations. And that trend seems to have been increasing, partially as a consequence, I think, of the market meltdown, partially as in response to the sense of the acuteness of many of the social problems that foundations deal with. So that's another. Then there's a fourth thing that's been happening is the escalation in the willingness of foundations to engage more overtly in advocacy, either by direct support of the foundation's donor if he's alive, which isn't taken as a tax deduction, or in creating separate 501c4s that can do it. That's a very significant change. And finally, another change that's taken place is, I think, the escalation in the momentum of the field of venture philanthropy and social entrepreneurship, which basically has been growing. It isn't new in the sense that I trace it back to Andrew Carnegie 100 years ago, but it was not. But it has not been. It has not been growing at an even pace. It fits and starts more, but it's now really begun to take off. What is venture philanthropy? Venture philanthropy is very high engagement by donors in the things that they support, essentially, and social entrepreneurship is really the use of analytic methods and implementation methods in the social sphere that were developed primarily in the business sphere, and that has begun to escalate too. Very, very much more interest among students in social entrepreneurship today than there was 5 years ago.